Now we're getting word that Putin may send in, or apparently is going to send in, 1,000 mercenaries into Ukraine. What does that tell us? I mean, these are not your 19-year-old Russian soldiers who, in some cases, might not be able to shoot straight or even understand why they're there.
These are older, seasoned, hard-bitten people, and I think the message here is a certain amount of desperation on Putin's part to have to do this at this point. I think that apparently the Russians thought they just waltz into Ukraine and the Ukrainians would just roll over and capitulate, which obviously hadn't been the case. So when he starts bringing in mercenaries, and one of the things I worry about is local use of chemical weapons against the civilian populace. And of course, Putin's good buddy Assad did that in Syria, which the Russians acquiesced in. So this is concerning.
And what options does the international community have left at this point? If the U.S., if NATO are saying at this point that a no-fly zone is not going to happen, and the sanctions have been essentially maxed out at this point. Perhaps there's more that can be done, banning Russian oil and so on.
Well, there is the remaining thing that could be sanctioned, which is Russian energy, which, of course, will have blowback effect on us and the rest of the world. So there is that.
And Putin is saying that would be a declaration of war.
Well, yeah, that's...
That it already is a declaration of war, essentially.
To me, we, the U.S., NATO, about 20 members of NATO, are already complicit because of the weapons that we've provided, notably javelins and stingers, which have resulted in the death of lots of Russian soldiers and the destruction of lots of Russian equipment. I love the clip of the helicopter going down. So, and we've been sanctioning him to one degree or another. Yeah, that's great. One degree or another since at least 2014. So, this is... You have to pay attention to what he says, obviously, and the intelligence community, I know, is certainly, but it's almost like after the fact, declaring what has long existed, and particularly with our provision of security assistance weapons to the Ukrainians.
And how great do you think the pressure has to be on Putin internationally? I mean, could it be escalated?
I don't know.
We see China not.
Obviously, if China
on the sidelines,
were to weigh in and not help the Russians get around sanctions or provide an alternative source of funding in the face of the sanctions, if China were to do that, that would have impact. I don't know what other arrows we have in our quiver, short of doing something like a no-fly zone, although at this point I think a no-artillery zone would be more effective than a no-fly zone.
Right. And I guess what other kinds of weaponry could be sent in? I know that Colonel Alexander Vindman has talked about, why don't we send in drones? Are there other types of weapons that can be funneled in somehow to help the Ukrainians even things out a bit more?
I don't know the state of play there, whether covertly or otherwise, that sort of thing isn't being provided either directly or indirectly. We have a lot of reconnaissance and surveillance aircraft flying in the area, and obviously they're looking into Ukraine. So I'm sure we're doing everything we can. I certainly would be if I were still at DNI, to make sure that the Ukrainians get all the information they can possibly get, particularly if it helps them kill Russians.
And if this drags on week after week after, and we see the humanitarian toll escalate significantly to a point where this is just a nightmare, a total nightmare beyond where we are right now. I know that the White House has said no boots on the ground. We're not going to go to war with Russia and so on. And I asked this of a guest earlier, Ruben Gallego talked about this earlier today on the program. At some point, does the United States need to say, okay, maybe some options do need to be on the table that we've taken off the table? Maybe just for starters, from a rhetorical standpoint, to put Putin on notice that you can't shoot rockets at nuclear power plants and just indiscriminately wipe people out.
Well, I think the powerful images that are portrayed of the wanton brutality are going to have an impact. That is going to cause, it already is, I'm sure, pressure on the U.S. and on NATO to do something beyond what we're doing right now, which, not to minimize it, it's quite substantial. But this is kind of Balkans on steroids, where we tolerated slaughter of Muslims for some time before we eventually got involved. Now, it's a different situation, no question about it. But I really wonder what the impact is going to be of this continued, and I predict increasing brutality of the Russians against Ukrainian citizens. And the Russians just kind of consider them combatants. That's the way they think of innocent citizens as combatants.
Yeah.